Hi, I'm Cole Scott. I'm a fourth year business administration student at Georgia Tech, and I'll tell you how I got above a 170 on the June LSAT. So the two main resources that I used for studying for the LSAT were 7Sage and LawHub. So LawHub is LSAC's tool that they use where you can practice using the exact interface that's going to be how you're taking your exam. And then 7Sage is a third-party tool, very popular, and it's where I took the majority of my practice tests and where I did a lot of my learning. So I do think that 7Sage is less helpful now than it was in the past because logic games are no longer on the test, and that was like their strong suit. But I still think it was super helpful for learning how to comprehend around the test, how to approach different problems, and really learning how you take the test. 7Sage was also super helpful when reviewing tests because they have a video for every single question that LSAC has put out. So whenever you get a question wrong, you can hear somebody explaining it, which is pretty helpful, especially at the beginning of your study when you don't really know why an answer is right or wrong. You can have somebody explain it to you why it's wrong, so on the next time you have a similar question, you won't make that same mistake again. The video explanations are not always perfect. Some are a lot better than others, so don't be afraid to not take everything that JY is saying with like absolute certainty and like use your own explanations. I think that's super helpful to learn, just knowing how you are looking at the test, because within 6 months of practicing with this test, you're gonna start developing a lot of skills around it and are gonna start becoming an expert in certain areas. You can really start knowing why an answer is wrong and an answer is right without the video explanation, which is pretty cool. So I took most of my practice tests with 7Sage just because it's integrated with the service super well. You can all the questions that you take are like automatically put into a system where it says like what kinds of questions you're getting wrong, what kinds of questions you're getting right, and different feedback on that. And it also just tracks all the questions that you've taken before, so you're not repeating you're not having questions that you've already taken on a practice test, which is never going to happen on a real exam, so you don't want that to happen with a practice test. And then as I was getting closer and closer to my test date, I recommend switching to LawHub, which I did to start taking your test, because the LawHub is exactly how it is going to be on the actual exam, and you want it to be as close as possible, your testing conditions to be as close as possible to the actual exam as you can get. So for two main reasons: one, just to not get thrown off by anything. I remember the first time I took a practice test on LawHub, it was very difficult for me to the font was just different, the highlighting techniques were different, and because of those two factors, it kind of threw me off my game, and I ended up scoring worse than my PT average, which could be just part from the test and could be a little bit from the LawHub. But you want zero problems like that on test day, so I would recommend start taking practice tests on LawHub. Also, as you get more familiar with LawHub, then you will start test days. You just want test day to be another test. You don't want to get in your head that it's like something different than what you've been doing in the past. So by practicing on LawHub, it'll just feel like another practice test, which is always a good thing. So I studied for the LSAT for about 8 months. The first thing that I did was take an initial diagnostic test. So that's just taking a test before you do anything. And I think that you should take a diagnostic test for 3 different reasons. So the first reason is just to see what you're good at and what you're not good at, because that's the whole reason of taking any practice test. When you're just starting out, you have no idea about anything. So seeing, oh, I was kind of good at this thing or I wasn't too good at this thing is good information to know. Next is to just really understand what a practice test is like, what it's like to take the LSAT, because when you get into the learning phase, you're not going to be taking a lot of actual tests, but you are going to be with the material a lot. So just having a better idea of this is why I'm studying for the test in this way, because I know what it's like to take an actual test can be helpful. And then lastly, it's super important to show your progress. As you progress through your LSAT studying, your scores are going to go up. And for pretty much the entirety of your LSAT studying, they're going to be lower than your goal score, because that's just how goals and working towards things works. But it's great to see like, oh, I'm still 3 points, 5 points below my goal score, but I'm 15 points above my diagnostic. That's really helpful to like keep your motivations and your spirits high. Like, I did make progress. I would not have been where I am right this second without all the hard work I put in, which is a great feeling to have. So I still have more work to do, but I did come really far. So I think that's the biggest reason to take a diagnostic test, is to get that base level where you can look back and see all the progress you've made. So after taking my initial diagnostic, I moved into the learning phase, which is just getting your mind around the general ideas of the test, how to take the test, what kind of logic do you need to understand what is required to get the correct answer on the test. And for this, I went through 7 Stages core curriculum, and this period of the test takes a long time, but it is super important to get those foundation skills necessary and sufficient. Some, most, all, these different ways that the LSAT tests you, and the ways that LSAT continues to use the same types of questions and the same ways over decades is important to know, because sure, you've taken logic before, you understand how an argument works from your classes, but the LSAC uses it in their own unique ways, which is really important to learn. So when you're taking a test, you can go bang, 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 and just understand exactly what it's asking you to know, and you don't have to have any thinking. And this whole learning phase took me about 3 months to get through all of the core curriculum, studying about an hour and a half a day. And it is a little bit of a drag. And during this time, I would not recommend taking any practice tests. I know that it's like very tempting to be like, oh, I just spent 2 months learning all these different parts of logical reasoning, or I really know how to approach a reading comprehension passage. Now I really want to jump in, take a test, and see how I do. I wouldn't recommend that, because you do only have a limited amount of material with the LSAT. There's only so many tests that LSAT has put out, so you don't want to go wasting them when you know that it's impossible for you to hit your goal score because you haven't learned anything on the test. It's good to see your progress, but I would just recommend holding off until you've finished your learning phase and you're ready to jump into your prep test phase. So now getting into the prep test phase. So after you finished all of your learning, whether you're doing 7 stage or reading something like The Loophole, it's now time to jump into prep tests. So what I did for these was every week was centered around a prep test on the weekend at the same time that I planned to take my actual test. And for this, what I did was I would take the practice test, blind review it the next day or the same day, and then use the rest of the week to do drills or learning or reviewing my material on the questions that I've been missing the most. And you just keep doing that back to back to back, and eventually you'll start hitting your goal score. So blind review is a technique that 7 Sage really recommends, and I think a lot of other people recommend too, which is basically taking a prep test into 2 different parts. One is the first timed, like, official way that you take a prep test with 35-minute sections, 10-minute break, follow everything to the T, And then once you're done taking the prep test, don't look at any answers, don't look at your score, don't do anything. Instead, any question you weren't 100% sure on, go back and review it and change your answer if necessary. Don't change your answer for like your prep test, but change it for like your blind review. Basically, you'll have 2 answers. And this is super important in my opinion because it shows whether you're missing a question because of something test related or you're missing a question because you don't understand the question, which can be 2 different things. So if you're nearing the end of your 35-minute section and you're rushing a little bit, you're going to be more likely to get questions wrong. And that doesn't mean that you didn't know how to do the questions. That means that you were rushing. So next time you're taking a prep test, you need to make sure that you're pacing better. Maybe you're answering questions at the beginning of the exam faster so you have more time at the end of the section. Something that regard. But if you're taking a test and you get the question wrong both on normal and blind review, that means something in the material you don't understand. So you don't understand the different parts of an argument, or you just didn't get that method of reasoning that was used within the argument. So something more test question related specifically to the question. And then for that, what you can do is you can go back and take a lot of similar questions to that one. Blind review is built into 7Sage, but for Law Hub it's not. So what you're gonna have to do is, as soon as you're done with the last question of the exam, and then as soon as the clock takes over, your score is gonna pop up on Law Hub. So what you're gonna wanna do is like really quick cover it with your hand and then go get like a piece of paper or something to cover your score, and then like slowly and methodically go over the different parts of like, look at each question one by one, but like don't see the correct answer right next to it. And if you do that, then you won't see any of the answers and nothing will get spoiled, which is what you need to do for blind review. It's a little bit tedious, but I do think it's worth it. But that's like another reason not to start Law Hub from the beginning. I do think that it would be better to start Law Hub from the beginning, but that's like one downside of doing it. And then also you go back and you put all your answers back into 7Sage so you can get the analytics. So after blind reviewing, then you can actually submit your test and see your answers and what questions you got wrong. After this, what you should be doing is going through every single question that you got wrong or any question that you guessed on and got right. And when you do this is where really all the learning comes in. So I also had a wrong answer journal where basically I would put any question I got wrong, the prep test number, the question number, the section number, the type of question it was, the time I spent on it, so either like a minute or a minute and a half or 10 seconds even, just like know where I got it wrong, how, and then an explanation of why my answer was incorrect, why the correct answer is correct, and what in the future I can do to not let this happen again. So that's just something that I did to really engage with every single question I got incorrect. And by doing this, I think it was super helpful to like seeing where I'm going wrong and correcting it for the future, instead of just being like, oh, I got that one wrong, that stinks. Like, no, dive into every single question, write it down. Don't just think it in your head, write it down. It's like the key to extracting information out of your brain. And this process of wrong answer journaling takes a lot of time at first because you're just missing so many questions. No offense, but you're missing a lot of questions, so it does take a lot of time. And that is just to be expected. You're getting a lot of your learning done at the beginning and then more fine-tuning it at the end. So front load that learning, make sure that each question that you're getting wrong, you're really extracting all the information you can out of it, because on test day, like, you want all that information. Then near the end of my studying for logical reasoning, whenever I got a question wrong, I would rewrite the question with different context, but with the same argument, structure, answer choice, like applicability, and like then the wrong answer choice is written with the same incorrect logic. And for this, I was just really trying to get in the heads of the LSAT writers, really understanding like all the parts of this test. Because if you want to master this test, you really have to dive in on the most basic level and understand why they're asking things the way that they are and like the whole structure of it all. And that was, in my opinion, really helpful for getting me over like that last hump of like true mastery of the test. And then during the prep test phase throughout the week, all the questions that I got wrong, the question types, I would pretty much just drill questions similar to that one. For me, argument part was very difficult to like just grasp, but now after taking every single argument part question that LSAT has released, I'm a lot more confident in that type of question. So that's what I did throughout the week, was just drilling sections and question types specifically to just build familiarity with the test. That's all this is making mistakes, learning from them, and eventually you're gonna start hitting your goal score, and that's when you should register to take the test. So for general tips, the first thing I would say is that this test is a giant mind game. LSAT writers are trying to get in your head. Like, everything is on its surface very easy questions to answer, but they're all phrased in a way that makes them very complicated. They'll intentionally use similar sounding words to throw you off, or write in convoluted language so you intentionally misread a part of the argument, and that's really frustrating, but it's just something to be aware of. You're not an idiot for misreading a question. It was intentionally designed to be misread. So don't let that get into your head. Just be aware of it. That's part of the game of this test. My next piece of advice would to be aware of how many clean questions that you have left. There's only a certain amount of officially released LSAT questions, so you don't want to just burn through them as fast as you can trying to learn. Really make sure that you're getting the most out of each one of them. It seems like there's an infinite amount at the beginning, but if you're with this test for a long time, you will start reaching the bottom of it. So just be aware of how much time you're putting in to each question and how many questions that you have left, because you don't want to get to a point where you're out of new questions that you haven't seen before. And then on that note, I would say resist the urge to take multiple prep tests per week. I've done it and I've gained nothing for it. Even like leading up to a test, you're like, oh, I'll just crank out a couple every week. I have nothing better to do. Like, I would resist that urge and instead use that effort to like really dive into each incorrect question, because you're not going to improve in 3 days. And it's just not going to be helpful. It's just going to burn prep tests. And then lastly, use a timer to track how much studying you've been putting in. I think it's super helpful to just always track your progress, even though it doesn't seem like you're making progress score-wise. At least you know that you are putting in the effort and the time-wise, which is always good for just your mental health. Knowing that you are making progress, you are putting in that effort, and even if it's not showing up right now, it will in the future. All right, so that's how I studied and got above a 170 for the LSAT. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and thank you for watching.